Shalom. Welcome to 5 Minutes of Torah with BI Rabbi. I'm Rabbi Adam Stein, coming to you from Whistler, as you can see and hear, where I'm on a short vacation with my family, relaxing a little bit now that Rabbi Infeld is back from his sabbatical. I just have a couple announcements for you before we get into a bit of Torah. Shabbat with a Difference coming up on May 5th. We had a wonderful one on April 7th. And once again, we'll have great musicians and singers, a lively service, followed by a great dinner. So please sign up for that. Also, that same weekend, it's Masorti Shabbat. Rabbi Jennifer Gorman will be visiting with us. She's the executive director of both Merkaz Canada. Merkaz is the conservative Masorti movement's Zionist arm. She's also the executive director of Canadian Foundation for Masorti Judaism. So we'll hear from her about Judaism and especially Masorti conservative Judaism in Israel. So recently, I've been thinking a lot about grief. We had 3 congregant families who lost loved ones during Pesach or right before Pesach, and all 3 were sitting in Shiva over the past week. These losses, like all we have had throughout each year, cover a variety of situations. Some that we mourn were quite elderly when they went. Some left at much too young an age, some were a shock, and some were sick for a long time. Whatever the situation, though, there's always grief, and that grief is different for every person. So each of us must sit with grief in our own way. Jenny Anderson, as a reporter for the Quartz News website, starts a recent article by telling of a heartbreaking task she had about 3 years ago. She and her mother and her sister-in-law had to tell her 4 nieces that their father, Ms. Anderson's brother, had died. He had been sick for 2 years, but as is often the case, the news still comes as a shock. So the girl's mother, her aunt, the reporter Ms. Anderson, and also the grandmother, they each went for one of the 3 oldest girls, enveloping them, she writes, completely in the hope that our embrace would shield them from the horror of what we were saying. But it did not. Their primal screams remain etched on my brain, she wrote. What powerful words, and what an awful, engaging, and challenging situation to be in, and one with great responsibility. Approaching the youngest daughter, of course, was the hardest. She was only 4. What Jenny Anderson and her family needed at that time was some guidance. They needed assurances that those girls, the adults too, would not drown in sadness and rage. Ms. Anderson's personal story of family grief is actually just an introduction, a poignant one, to her extensive discussion of Sheryl Sandberg's new book called Option B. Sheryl Sandberg is one of the top executives at Facebook, and she lost her husband, Dave Goldberg, in the middle of 2015. They were on vacation in Mexico, and Dave went to the gym to work out. Turned out he had a cardiac arrhythmia, condition of the heart, that probably caused him to fall off the treadmill, hit his head, and by the time he got to the hospital 20 minutes away, he died soon after. Sandberg was already widely known for her first book, Lean In, and this tragedy put her even more in the limelight. Her book, Option B, describes Sandberg's journey through the fog of sadness and anger to her choice to find happiness again. It is a study of resilience and how we build it for ourselves and for our kids, as well as what it is like to have it tested. Her journey started when tragedy struck her family, and the world gained some insight into her grief when she wrote a long post online, on Facebook of course, at the end of the Shloshim period of her mourning. Now, if you guessed from the last names Sandberg and Goldberg that these 2 people were Jewish, you're right. The post she wrote explained about Shloshim and Shiva and were shared by millions of Facebook users and others online. She shared her experience of dealing with grief in the hope that it might help others in their own struggles. One of the most significant and oft-quoted parts of the post might be this one. She wrote, "I think that when tragedy occurs, it presents a choice. You can give in to the void, the emptiness that fills your heart, your lungs, constricts your ability to think or even breathe, or you can try to find meaning. These past 30 days, I've spent many of my moments lost in that void, and I know that many future moments will be consumed by the vast emptiness as well." But she chose to find meaning. And I'm not suggesting, I imagine she isn't either, that anyone in deep grief can just turn around and find meaning instead. But that sometimes within that grief and within our Jewish traditions surrounding mourning, we can find that meaning. Now, I won't tell you to read the book, it just came out, I haven't read it myself yet, but these reviews are good, and I can tell you that her drive to share her experience of struggle with grief so that others can learn from it, her sharing of Jewish tradition with millions, and her honesty are a welcome addition to a world that sometimes seems so broken, especially for those dealing with tragedy and grief. May the memory of Dave Goldberg and the memories of our members' loved ones who they lost in recent weeks all be for a blessing. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.